Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous and, frankly, disastrous policy failures in American history, Prohibition. You gotta hear this promise. This was the grand vision for Prohibition back in 1920. Supporters imagined a completely transformed nation, a healthier, safer, more virtuous America, finally free from what they called demon rum. It sounds incredible, right? Yeah, well, the reality? It was a total nightmare compared to that dream. Instead of emptying out the prisons, it created legendary gangsters like Al Capone and led to incredibly brutal events like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The whole decade was just stained with violence. So, the big question is, how on earth did a noble experiment go so wrong? How did it lead to all this chaos? To really get it, we've got to rewind and look at why it even happened in the first place. Okay, so let's be clear. This whole nationwide ban on booze didn't just happen overnight. Not at all. It was actually the final push after decades of campaigning by this, well, surprisingly diverse and really powerful group of people. And when I say diverse, I mean it. The push for a dry America was coming from literally all sides. You had moral and religious reformers, of course, but you also had patriots who were tying it all into the World War I effort. And get this. Even huge industrialists saw a big upside to having a sober workforce. But the real engine behind this whole thing, it was a group called the Anti-Saloon League. And these guys weren't your average activists. They were absolute masters of what they called pressure politics. They were this laser-focused single-issue group, and their only goal was to make politicians vote their way. And wow, were they good at it. So they did it. The law passed. America was officially dry. Or, that was the plan. But here's the twist. Instead of fixing America's problems, Prohibition basically opened up a Pandora's box of new ones. And you could argue they were way, way more dangerous. Just look at that number, $100 million. That's the estimated annual income for Al Capone when he was at the top of his game. And that whole fortune, it was built completely on selling illegal booze, running casinos, the whole shebang. See, the thing is, people didn't just stop wanting to drink. So with all that demand, a massive criminal underworld just exploded into existence almost overnight. You had these illegal bars, speakeasies, popping up literally everywhere. In New York City alone, there were an estimated 100,000 of them. That's way more than the number of legal bars they were supposed to replace. So remember that whole idea of turning prisons into factories? Well, the exact opposite happened. The law that was supposed to enforce all this, the Volstead Act, it just filled prisons to the breaking point. This chart here from Sing Sing Prison says it all. Look at that immediate, massive spike in the number of inmates right after it started. And the violence, it was just staggering. You have these bootlegging gangs fighting these brutal wars over territory. And the national murder rate? It shot up by 78%. But look closely at the chart. See how it peaks right there in 1933? And then, the second Prohibition is repealed, it just drops like a rock. It's unbelievable. So here's the really crazy part, right? The law itself became the main reason for all the crime. It led to corrupt cops, it jammed up the entire court system, and maybe worst of all, it made everyday people just lose respect for the law in general. Okay, so we've got the explosion in organized crime, but there is also this basic economic rule happening behind the scenes, one that actually made drinking way more dangerous than it was before. It's a concept called the iron law of prohibition, and the logic is actually super simple. Think about it. If you're going to smuggle something, you want to get the most potent stuff into the smallest possible package, right? It's just way easier to hide and move a little bottle of super strong whiskey than it is to lug around a giant, clunky keg of beer. And this chart right here, this is the iron law in action. Plain as day. Before Prohibition, you can see people spent about the same on beer as they did on hard liquor. But the second that law passes, boom, the market flips almost completely to potent distilled spirits. That bulky, less profitable beer, it practically vanished. And this shift wasn't just an economic footnote. It had truly deadly consequences. With zero regulations, you had amateur moonshiners mixing up toxic batches of booze. But here's the really shocking part. The government itself required that industrial-grade alcohol be poisoned to keep people from drinking it. Of course, bootleggers tried to distill the poison out, but they often failed, and thousands of people died from drinking this poisoned liquor. So, you've got this perfect storm, right? Rampant crime, massive corruption, and a public health crisis. It was pretty clear that the end of this whole experiment was just a matter of time. And boy, did public opinion turn fast. People were just sick and tired of the violence. And in a really ironic twist, women's groups, who were some of the biggest supporters of Prohibition to begin with, started organizing against it. They argued that the law itself was now the biggest threat to their families. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the Great Depression hit. Suddenly, all that potential tax money from legal alcohol sales looked pretty darn good to a government that was flat broke. After that, the whole thing just fell apart, and it happened fast. By 1929, even a government commission basically threw up its hands and said, yeah, this is unenforceable. A few years later, Franklin D. Roosevelt campaigns for president promising to end it. And then, in December 1933, it was official. The 21st Amendment passed, and after almost 14 very long years, the noble experiment was finally over. So, what do we take away from all this? What are the big lessons from this massive, failed attempt to engineer society? I mean, what can we really learn from such a spectacular failure? Well, when you look at the promises versus the reality, it's pretty stark. On just about every single goal it had, the experiment didn't just fail, it actually made the original problems a whole lot worse. I think the biggest takeaway is this, and it's a fundamental lesson about how people and markets work. When a whole lot of people really want something, you can't just ban it and expect it to go away. It doesn't work like that. All a ban does is drive the whole business underground, and that creates a violent, totally unregulated, and incredibly profitable black market. And that really is the powerful question this whole story leaves us with, isn't it? Prohibition was a massive failure at engineering society. So now, 100 years later, you have to ask yourself, where else might we be making the exact same mistakes today?